The scorching sun punished the marble sidewalk of the upscale neighborhood, while Micah carefully organized the few belongings he had managed to gather on an old stretched sheet. At only 10 years old, his small shoulders already carried the weight of responsibilities that even many adults couldn't bear. His trembling fingers arranged the literature books his mother so cherished, bound volumes of poetry and classic novels, some with pages yellowed by time, others still with the characteristic smell of new paper. Beside them, the old golden pocket watch that had belonged to his grandfather, the only memento he kept of the man he barely knew. Mom always said Grandpa used to carry me in his arms singing lullabies, but I was too small to remember. Now it's just another treasure I need to let go to save her, he whispered to himself as a stubborn tear ran down his freckled cheek. The improvised barrier built with cardboard boxes displayed prices written with colored pen on pieces of cardboard. Micah had spent the night awake, calculating how much he would need to complete the exorbitant amount his mother's treatment required. His brown eyes, usually bright and curious, were now opaque, surrounded by deep dark circles that contrasted with his pale skin. He wore his best clothes, a faded blue shirt and jeans slightly short for his size, hoping to look more presentable to the wealthy residents passing by. Some people slowed their pace when passing, looking with a mixture of curiosity and distrust at the lonely boy selling clearly personal objects. An elegant-looking lady stopped briefly, examining one of the hardcover books. "How much for this book, little one? It seems quite worn, don't you think the price is a bit high?" "I can pay half of that," she said, pointing to the tag with an air of superiority that made Micah's stomach turn. The boy swallowed hard, clenching his fist so tightly that his knuckles turned white. The book in question was special, an anthology of poems his mother read to him every night before sleep, even when fever consumed her and each word seemed to cost her twice the energy. Her thin, warm hands turning the pages, the melodic sound of her voice reciting verses that spoke of hope and overcoming challenges. Now those same hands could barely hold a glass of water, and her voice, once so vibrant, was nothing more than a whisper broken by pain. Micah felt tears welling up again, but held them back. He wouldn't bargain, not with this. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but I can't lower the price. My mother has leukemia. The experimental treatment costs more than we earn in a year. And this book would mean more to her than the money you're offering would mean to me," he responded, with a determination that surprised even himself, as the woman quickly walked away, as if the boy's suffering might be contagious. A few meters away, inside a luxury car with tinted windows, Marshall observed the scene with growing interest. The businessman in his 40s was accustomed to evaluating situations with calculating coldness. That's what had taken him to the top, transforming the small family business into an empire. Impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, he checked his wristwatch, an item that probably cost more than all the objects displayed by the boy combined. Originally, Marshall had only stopped on that street to take an important call before heading to a meeting at the business center, but something about the solitary figure of the boy intrigued him. There's something familiar about him. In the way he faces adversity with his head held high, even when tears threaten to fall. He reminds me of someone. But who? He muttered to himself, adjusting the rearview mirror to continue observing the boy while finalizing the call. The morning advanced, and Micah began to feel the effects of heat and hunger. He hadn't had breakfast. The little milk they had at home was saved for his mother, who needed to keep her strength to resist until they could get the money for the treatment. A middle-aged couple approached, examining with genuine interest the few toys the boy displayed. A hand-painted metal car, a set of lead soldiers inherited from previous generations, and a small collection of colored marbles, some with spirals that looked like miniature galaxies. The man picked up the car, spinning the worn wheels with curiosity. "My boy, are all these toys yours? Won't you miss them?" he asked with a gentle voice, while his wife smiled encouragingly. Micah looked at the toys, memories of sunny afternoons playing in the small courtyard of his former apartment, before the illness, before everything fell apart. "They were my favorites, sir, but Mum needs expensive medicine. The doctor said there's a new treatment that could cure her, but the hospital wants a lot of money up front. I'd rather be without toys than without her," he answered, with the painful wisdom of someone who matured far too early. Marshall finally decided to get out of the car, moved by a curiosity he couldn't even explain himself. There was something about the boy that awakened feelings long buried under layers of cynicism and business pragmatism. As he approached the improvised stand, he could better see the displayed items. Well-kept books despite their use, small decorative objects, some clothing pieces, still with tags. But it was the determination in the boy's eyes that really impressed him. That wasn't a look of defeat, it was a look of struggle, of someone willing to make any sacrifice for love. When was the last time I cared about someone enough to sacrifice something truly valuable? Thought the businessman, feeling a twinge of shame for the lonely, self-centered life he had built. Adjusting his silk tie, Marshall stopped in front of the stretched sheet, aware of the glaring contrast between his Italian shoes and the dusty sidewalk where the boy had set up his modest display. "Hello, young man. I see you have an interesting collection here. Could you tell me more about it?" Micah looked up to face the tall, imposing man who now cast a shadow over his small stand. There was something intimidating about his presence. Perhaps it was the perfectly aligned suit, the designer sunglasses, or simply the aura of authority he radiated. For a moment, the boy feared he might be some kind of inspector or authority who had come to expel him, prohibiting his improvised sale. But there was also a note of genuine interest in the man's deep voice, something that made Micah relax slightly. Straightening himself to appear taller, the boy began to explain each item with the pride of a true merchant. "This watch belonged to my grandfather, sir. He was a watchmaker and said this model had more than 100 gears. And these books are from my mother's personal collection. She's a teacher, or was before she got sick. Each one has stories she's told me since I was little. This one," he said, pointing to a particularly worn volume, "has a special dedication from my father to her, before he left." The conversation was interrupted by the insistent ringing of Marshall's phone. With an apologetic gesture, the businessman answered quickly, stepping away a few paces. It was his secretary, reminding him of the meeting with investors that would start in less than half an hour. With short, precise phrases, Marshall reorganized his schedule, postponing the appointment until later. Something about this casual encounter prevented him from simply turning his back and going on his way. Returning to the boy, Marshall began to examine the objects more closely, running his fingers along the spines of the books, admiring the quality of the antique watch, asking about each piece with genuine interest. It was then that his eyes fell upon a simple picture frame, almost hidden among the other items. The frame was modest, made of light wood with small handcrafted carvings, but that wasn't what captured his attention. It was the photograph protected by the slightly dusty glass, the face of a young, smiling woman with bright eyes and dark hair that framed delicate yet striking features. Is this your mother?" he asked with a suddenly trembling voice, removing his dark glasses to better see the image that seemed to have come directly from his past. Little Micah nodded with a sad smile, picking up the picture frame carefully, like someone holding a fragile treasure. His fingers lovingly cleaned the dust from the glass, revealing even more clearly the woman's face. "Yes, sir. This photo was taken before she got sick, when she still taught at school. She always smiled like this, you know, even when things were difficult. Now she tries to smile, but I know it hurts. I can see it in her eyes. The doctor said without the new treatment, she won't last much longer," explained the boy, his voice failing on the last sentence, as he fought against the tears that insisted on returning. Extending the picture frame so the man could see better, Micah continued, "I didn't want to sell this photo. It's the only one where she looks really happy. But if someone wants to buy it, I'll sell it, because I know Mom would rather be alive with me than have her picture kept on a shelf." Marshall felt as if the world around him had drastically slowed down. The hustle of the busy street, the heat of the midday sun, the weight of his business responsibilities, everything momentarily disappeared as he stared at the photograph. That smile, those eyes, that expression of serene joy. They were unmistakable, Sylvia, the woman he had loved with all the intensity of his youth, the love he believed he had lost forever when she disappeared from his life without explanation, leaving only an emptiness that he had tried to fill with ambition and material success. His hands began to visibly tremble as he held the picture frame, long repressed memories flooding his mind like an uncontrollable torrent. The shared moments, the promises made, the dreams planned together, and then the searing pain of the inexplicable abandonment that had transformed him into the cold, calculating man he was today. It can't be her. After all these years, it can't be, he muttered more to himself than to the boy who was watching him with growing concern. A wave of dizziness hit him like a physical blow, making the landscape around him spin violently. Her name. What is your mother's name, boy? He asked urgently, his voice now just a hoarse whisper. Micah noticed the drastic change in the man's behavior. The businessman's face, previously composed and impassive, now exhibited an alarming pallor. His hands, which held the picture frame, were shaking so much that the boy feared he might drop the precious photograph. Confused and a little frightened by the stranger's intense reaction, Micah hesitated for a moment before responding. My mother's name is Sylvia, sir. Sylvia, the literature teacher that all students loved. Are you all right? You look like you've seen a ghost, he asked, stretching out his small hand as if to support the man who seemed increasingly unstable. The question went unanswered. Marshall took a stumbling step backward, his eyes fixed on the photograph as if hypnotized. The world around him seemed distant and unreal. While flashes of memory passed before his eyes, Sylvia laughing as she ran along the beach, Sylvia concentrated over poetry books, Sylvia in his arms promising eternal love. The realization hit him like lightning. The boy in front of him, with those determined eyes that had so intrigued him, would it be possible? Questions accumulated in his mind in a confused whirlwind, but before he could formulate any of them aloud, his legs gave way beneath his weight. The picture frame slipped from his trembling hands as Marshall collapsed unconscious on the sidewalk, under the terrified gaze of Micah and the few passers-by who witnessed the unusual scene of a millionaire fainting at the feet of a street vendor boy. The smell of antiseptic invaded Micah's nostrils as he huddled in the waiting room chair, his feet barely touching the floor. The fluorescent hospital lights cast a pale glow over his tired face, accentuating the deep circles that framed his anxious eyes. In his small hands, the picture frame with the photo of his mother was protected like a talisman, his fingers unconsciously caressing the wooden frame every few minutes, as if he could extract from it some kind of strength or explanation. The confusion in his mind was almost as intense as the fear he felt. The rich man had fainted upon seeing his mother, not a reaction any stranger would have. Nurses and doctors hurried past, casting curious glances at the solitary boy, who had arrived in the same ambulance as the important businessman, but no one stopped to explain what was happening. Mom always said that fate has mysterious ways of uniting paths that should meet. Could this man have some connection to our past? Could he help us with her treatment? He murmured to himself, while his eyes remained glued to the door through which Marshall had been taken. He had been there for almost 2 hours, his stomach growling with hunger, his throat dry with anxiety. Micah had witnessed all the commotion on the sidewalk, the passers-by stopping in a circle, someone calling the ambulance, paramedics arriving in a hurry and placing the unconscious man on the stretcher. When asked if there was any family member, Micah didn't know what to answer, just firmly held the picture frame and said he needed to go along. To his surprise, one of the paramedics allowed it, perhaps moved by the determination in the boy's eyes, or perhaps just because there was no time for discussions. And now he was there, not knowing whether he should leave or stay, whether he should seek information or wait patiently, whether he should call his neighbor who had promised to check on his mother at the apartment during his absence. The thoughts swirled in his mind like leaves in the wind. If only I could understand what's happening. If only I knew why he reacted that way when he saw Mum. Maybe this is the help I've been praying to find, or maybe it's just another disappointment in our path, he whispered, pressing the photo against his chest as if he could transmit his concerns directly to his mother's dormant heart. The sound of high heels striking against the vinyl floor echoed through the nearly empty corridor, catching Micah's attention. A tall, elegant woman, in an impeccably fitted suit and hair pulled back in a severe bun, approached with determined steps. Her face was a mask of professional efficiency, sharp eyes scanning the room until they settled on the boy. Without hesitation, she sat in the chair next to him, placing her leather portfolio on her lap with a precise movement. "Hello, you must be the boy from the sidewalk. I'm Mr. Marshall's personal secretary. He has regained consciousness and is being examined by doctors now," she said in a controlled voice, neither cold nor warm, just perfectly modulated to convey information without emotion. Her eyes, however, drifted to the picture frame in Micah's hands, a brief flash of curiosity breaking her professional composure. "That woman in the photo seems to have caused quite an impact on my boss. I've never seen him lose control like that in all these years working for him," she commented, her voice now containing an almost imperceptible note of intrigue. Micah straightened in his chair, a thread of hope running through his tired body. The secretary's arrival meant he would finally have some answers. He observed her carefully, noticing how her gestures were calculated and precise, as if each movement had been rehearsed to convey authority. The mention of Marshall's condition brought him momentary relief. At least the man was alive and conscious. But there was something in the woman's tone when mentioning his mother that made him uncomfortable, a veiled suggestion that there was more to this story than it appeared. Clutching the picture frame more tightly, he gathered courage to ask, "Will Mr. Marshall be okay? Why did he faint when he saw my mother's photo? Do you know each other?" The questions came out in a burst, betraying his repressed anxiety. Before the secretary could respond, she opened her portfolio and removed a thick envelope, placing it on the low table between them. "My boss is a very busy and important man. I don't know what kind of connection exists between him and this woman in the photo, and frankly, it's none of my business. I'm here only to resolve this situation in the most efficient way possible. In this envelope, there's enough money to buy all the items you were selling, including this photograph, for double the price you asked. In exchange, we would like you to be discreet about today's incident and go on your way. Mr. Marshall appreciates your understanding." The proposal hung in the air like a heavy storm cloud. Micah looked at the envelope, imagining how much money it might contain. Perhaps enough to start his mother's treatment, maybe even to cover the first few months. The temptation was palpable, like an invisible hand squeezing his heart. With that money, he could run back to the apartment, surprise his mother with the news that he had found a solution, see hope return to those eyes that lately showed only resignation. But something within him rebelled against the idea. It was more than curiosity. It was a deep intuition, almost primitive, that there was something important connecting his mother to this stranger. His small hands began to tremble, not from fear, but from indignation. Some instinct told him there was more at stake in this offer than just discretion about an embarrassing fainting spell. Raising his chin in a defiant gesture that made him seem much older than his 10 years, he pushed away the envelope with surprising firmness. "I don't want your money, ma'am. I mean, I do want it. I desperately need it to save my mother. But not like this. Not without understanding what's happening. I need to know why he fainted when he saw my mother. If he knows her, if there's some history between them, that could be important. Maybe he can really help us, not just with money, but with answers we've been looking for so long. Please, I need to talk to him." The secretary stiffened, clearly not accustomed to having her offers refused, especially by a child. Her perfectly outlined eyebrows joined in a frown of displeasure as she collected the rejected envelope with rigid movements. For a moment, she seemed about to insist, perhaps increase the offer or try a firmer approach. But something in the boy's determined look made her hesitate. There was a maturity in those young eyes, a willpower that seemed out of place in someone so small. Sighing slightly, she closed her folder with a decisive snap and stood up, adjusting her blazer with a precise tug. "I will inform Mr. Marshall about your refusal. I cannot promise he will agree to see you. My boss values his privacy above all else and does not usually grant unscheduled audiences, especially in situations like this," she declared, her tone now colder, clearly disappointed with the direction of the conversation. Quickly consulting her wristwatch, she added, "Wait here, I will return with his decision. If it's negative, I hope you will reconsider my generous offer. Medical treatment is expensive, and opportunities like this don't come twice for people in your situation." The secretary's words, loaded with barely disguised condescension, echoed in Micah's ears long after her footsteps had faded down the hallway. The silence that followed seemed to amplify the doubts growing in his mind. She was right. The treatment was expensive, terribly expensive. Each day that passed without getting the money was one day less in his mother's battle against the disease. The feeling of helplessness that accompanied him daily threatened to suffocate him again. He rose from the chair and began to walk in circles around the empty waiting room, trying to organize his thoughts. The photo in his hands now seemed to weigh a ton, loaded with unanswered questions and mysterious possibilities. Why would a rich and powerful man faint at the sight of his mother's photo? What kind of history might exist between them? And why had she never mentioned anything about knowing someone like Marshall? The minutes dragged by with torturous slowness as questions multiplied without answers. Mom always told me stories about the past, about how she met Dad, about the places she lived, but never, not once, did she mention someone like him. What else hasn't she told me? What other secrets does she keep so deeply that even in our most difficult moments she didn't feel comfortable sharing? He murmured to himself, his voice choked by the mixture of hope and fear that now dominated his heart. When the secretary finally returned, her face was tense, the lines around her mouth more pronounced, suggesting a difficult conversation with her boss. Wordlessly, she gestured for Micah to follow her, leading him through a maze of corridors to a private wing of the hospital. The difference was immediately visible. Shinier floors, walls decorated with discreet but clearly valuable art, deeper silence, only occasionally interrupted by the muffled sound of sophisticated medical equipment. They stopped in front of a door where a security guard in a dark suit stood watch, looking at Micah with a neutral expression that nonetheless managed to be intimidating. The secretary leaned in slightly, her voice low and urgent. "He has agreed to see you, but only for a few minutes. He is emotionally shaken, and the doctors recommend absolute rest. Don't pressure him with excessive questions, and please don't contradict him. Mr. Marshall has a volatile temper when challenged, especially when he's vulnerable. And whatever the connection between him and your mother, it's clearly a delicate matter." Straightening up again, she adjusted an invisible strand of hair and assumed her professional mask. "I'll be waiting out here. If there's any problem, the security guard will intervene immediately. You have exactly 10 minutes, she concluded, opening the door without waiting for a response and practically pushing Micah into the room. The luxury of the hospital room was as disconcerting as the figure of the man who occupied it. Marshall was sitting on the bed, not lying down, as Micah had expected to find him. He wore a silk robe over his hospital pajamas, an incongruity that somehow seemed perfectly natural on him. His face was pale, but his eyes, those penetrating eyes that had examined Micah's belongings on the sidewalk, burned with a feverish intensity. Tubes and sensors connected him to silent machines that monitored his vital signs, subtly reminding that despite all his apparent strength, he was fragile. An untouched food tray rested on a side table, the aroma of a meal certainly more sophisticated than standard hospital food lingering in the air. Marshall observed Micah entering with an expression difficult to decipher, a mixture of anger, curiosity, and something deeper, almost painful. The silence between them stretched like an elastic about to break, until finally the man spoke, his voice contained but loaded with emotion. "So you refused the money. Interesting strategy. How much more do you want? Name your price." Marshall's fingers drummed impatiently on the Egyptian cotton sheet, his tense posture contradicting the apparent casualness of his words. "Everyone has a price, kid. I've learned that over the years. Some people just take longer to admit it." Micah remained standing near the door, feeling deeply out of place in that environment that exuded privilege and power. The photo frame was still firm in his hands, like a shield against the barely disguised hostility emanating from the man in the bed. He took a deep breath, seeking courage from the depths of his being. Fear was there. It would be foolish to deny it. But there was something stronger driving him, the desperate need to understand, to find answers that could change his mother's fate. He took a step forward, then another, approaching the bed with a silent determination that seemed to surprise Marshall. His gaze was direct, devoid of the subservience that the businessman probably expected. "I'm not here to negotiate, sir. I didn't refuse the money to ask for more. I refused because I need to understand what happened. You fainted when you saw my mother's photo. That's not normal. If you know her, If there's a history between you, I have the right to know." The words came out firmly, despite the almost imperceptible tremor in his voice. Raising the photo frame so Marshall could see again the image that had caused so much commotion, he continued, "This is Sylvia, my mother. She's dying of leukemia, and I'm selling everything we have to try to save her. If you can help us in any way, please, not for money, but for any connection you have with her, I'm begging." Tears threatened to form, but Micah contained them, determined to maintain dignity in front of this intimidating man. "I'm not trying to deceive you or extort you. I just want to understand why fate put us on the same path today." Marshall's expression transformed, the mask of control momentarily slipping to reveal a vulnerability that seemed out of place on his habitually impassive face. His eyes fixed again on the photograph, a myriad of emotions crossing his countenance in rapid succession: pain, anger, nostalgia, and something that could be interpreted as longing. For an instant, he seemed about to reach out to touch the image, but stopped himself, clenching his fist so tightly that his knuckles whitened. When he spoke again, his voice had lost some of the hostility but acquired a cutting quality, like thin ice that could crack at any moment. "Where did you get that photo? It's a scam, isn't it? Someone sent you here, instructed you on what to say, how to act." The questions fired like projectiles, each loaded with suspicion. Marshall leaned forward, ignoring the accelerated beep of the heart monitor that registered his growing agitation. "You waited all these years to show up like this out of nowhere, with this dramatic story about diseases and expensive treatments. You thought I would easily fall into this trap because of an old photograph? Tell me the truth, kid. Who really sent you?" His breathing had become faster, shallow as he struggled to maintain the control that was clearly escaping him. "You have no idea what you're meddling with, what wounds you're reopening with this cheap theater." The accusation hit Micah like a physical blow, making him instinctively back away. The idea that someone could think he was involved in some kind of scheme, that his pain and desperation were just an act to extort money, was as absurd as it was painful. He felt heat rise to his face, not from shame but from indignation, an emotion he rarely experienced. For a moment he almost turned his back to leave, to flee from the unjust accusations and hostility of that stranger. But the image of his mother, weakened and suffering in their small apartment, anchored him in place. Swallowing his wounded pride, he forced himself to face Marshall's accusing gaze. "It's not a scam, sir. This photo has been on our living room shelf for as long as I can remember. It's the only photo of her smiling that we have. My mother is a literature teacher, or was before the disease took her strength. She taught at various schools, always loved books and poetry. She was always telling me stories, even when she was too tired to get out of bed." Micah's voice trembled slightly, but his eyes remained steady on Marshall's, conveying a sincerity that no child actor could simulate. "I don't know who you are or what my mother meant to you in the past. She never spoke about knowing someone like you, but I know I'm not lying, and with all due respect, I think you know that too deep down. You feel something strong when you see this photo, something real. Please, if you know my mother, if you ever meant something to her, help us understand. I'm not asking for your money now. I'm asking for the truth." A heavy silence settled in the room, disturbed only by the persistent beep of heart monitors and Marshall's irregular breathing. Something in Micah's words had penetrated the businessman's armor of distrust. His eyes, now more scrutinizing than hostile, studied every detail of the boy's face, as if searching for traces of something, or someone, familiar. Slowly, almost reluctantly, Marshall leaned back on the pillows, the tension in his shoulders marginally decreasing. "Literature," he murmured, more to himself than to Micah. She always loved the classics, could recite Shakespeare from memory, even the most obscure sonnets. The comment escaped like an unintentional confidence, a memory that surfaced spontaneously. Realizing what he had said, Marshall closed his eyes for a moment, as if trying to reorganize his thoughts, regain the control that was visibly slipping. When he opened them again, there was a new quality in his gaze, still cautious, still defensive, but with a glimmer of something that could be interpreted as resignation. "Sylvia, your mother, if she really is who I think she is, was the great love of my youth," he finally admitted, the words coming out with effort as if each one caused physical pain. "We met at university. I wasn't rich yet, was just starting out, building my way with difficulty. She was brilliant, passionate about literature, came from a simple but dignified family. We were together for 3 years, the best of my life. We planned to get married, build a life together, and then, from one day to the next, she disappeared. No explanations, no letter, no phone call. She abandoned me without explanation." The revelation hung in the air like an unexpected confession laden with decades of unresolved hurt. Marshall seemed almost surprised at himself for having shared so much, especially with a child he had considered part of an elaborate scam just minutes ago. His face contorted with the force of contradictory emotions that assailed him. Anger at the old betrayal, confusion at the sudden appearance of this connection to the past, and something more complex that seemed to slowly emerge to the surface. With an abrupt movement, he extended his hand, not for the photo frame but for Micah himself, as if wanting to touch him to confirm his real existence. How old are you?" he asked, his voice suddenly hoarse, trembling with a growing suspicion that seemed to terrify and attract him simultaneously. Before Micah could answer, the door to the room burst open, interrupting the moment. A doctor followed by 2 nurses rushed in, alarmed by the altered vital signs appearing on the monitor at the nursing station. "Mr. Marshall, your heart rate is much too elevated. We need you to calm down immediately, or we'll have to administer a sedative," the doctor declared with professional authority, casting a disapproving look at Micah. "This visit is over. Whoever this young man is, he needs to leave now. The patient's health is our priority." The moment of revelation had been brutally interrupted, leaving both man and boy suspended in a limbo of unformulated questions and incomplete answers. Micah felt firm hands on his shoulders, inexorably leading him toward the door. Panic rose in his throat like bile, the feeling that he was losing something crucial, something that could change everything. Marshall also seemed alarmed by the interruption, trying to push the doctor away with impatient gestures, his eyes still fixed on Micah with an almost feverish intensity. "Wait, we haven't finished our conversation," the businessman protested, his voice stronger now, recovering part of his usual authority. "This boy, I need to know more." The words were lost in the growing tumult, as nurses checked equipment and the doctor spoke in urgent tones about blood pressure and arrhythmias. Micah, already at the threshold of the door, being practically pushed outside by an impassive security guard, gathered all his courage for one last act of defiance. Taking a deep breath, he projected his voice above the medical commotion, the words coming out clear and resonant in the suddenly silent room. "My father died before I was born. At least that's what Mom always said. I'm 10 years and 4 months old, born on November 15th. If you want to find me again, I'll be selling our things on the same sidewalk tomorrow. Mom needs that treatment soon. We don't have much time." And then the door closed, separating them, leaving Marshall with an expression of absolute shock frozen on his pale face, while doctors rushed to stabilize his now dangerously erratic vital signs. Micah climbed the worn steps of the old building with heavy steps. The broken elevator forced him to face the 5 floors on foot. His body was exhausted, but his mind was buzzing with the revelations from the hospital. Marshall's words echoed, "She abandoned me without explanation." The key turned in the rusty lock and he entered the small apartment. The smell of herbal tea and old books enveloped him before his eyes found Sylvia's frail figure, reclining on the sofa, covered by a colorful shawl that did not disguise her alarming thinness. An open book rested in her lap. So many secrets between these walls. Will we ever truly know those we love the most? Thought Micah, closing the door. Sylvia awoke with the soft noise. Her eyes, still bright despite the illness, lit up as she recognized her son. With effort, she straightened up, adjusting the scarf that covered her bald head. Micah noticed how her fingers trembled, how her skin had a grayish tone. Forcing a smile, he sat on the edge of the sofa, taking his mother's cold hands. "How are you feeling today, Mum? The neighbor said you managed to sleep a little," he asked gently, trying to mask the emotional storm consuming him. Sylvia smiled weakly. "I'm fine, my little warrior, just tired. Tell me about your day. Did you sell anything? Your face looks different, as if carrying a new weight. What happened out there? Micah looked away, the question catching him off guard. The phone in his pocket weighed like lead. At the hospital, he had taken a photo of the businessman. Fidgeting with the hem of his shirt, he tried to find courage. "Mom, something strange happened today. I met a man who seemed to know you," he began hesitantly. "He saw your photo in the frame and had a very strong reaction, fainted on the sidewalk. Paramedics took him to the hospital and I went along. We talked, and he said things about the past, about you two, things you never told me." A frightening transformation occurred on Sylvia's face. The color disappeared completely. Her eyes widened in an expression of terror, pupils dilating. Her hands gripped her son's with surprising strength. Her breathing became erratic. The book slipped from her lap and fell to the floor. Micah, startled by the reaction, almost regretted mentioning the encounter. Sylvia finally spoke, her voice a strangled whisper. "What man, Micah? What was his name?" The questions came out fragmented by growing panic. "Please tell me it wasn't. It couldn't be. After all these years, not now. Not when I'm like this." Micah's hesitation evaporated in the face of her evident panic. With careful movements, he adjusted his position to support her, while his other hand reached for the phone. Sylvia's reaction confirmed what Marshall had said. There was a history between them. Taking a deep breath, Micah unlocked the phone and showed her the hospital photo. "This man, Mom, Marshall. He said you met at university, that you were together for 3 years, that you planned to get married," he explained softly. "He said you disappeared without explanation, and when they kicked me out of the room, I told him I'm 10 years old and that my father died before I was born." The expression on his face. He did the math. "Please, I need to know the truth. Who is my father, really?" Sylvia stared at the photo as if facing a ghost. A violent tremor ran through her weakened body. She raised a hand to touch the screen, her fingers hovering above the image without making contact. A strangled sound escaped her throat. The panic attack was in full development. Sylvia's breathing became increasingly labored. With a trembling movement, she pushed the phone away. Tears streamed down her face. "I didn't want you to find out this way," she finally whispered. "I wanted to protect you, protect both of you. Marshall. My God, how he must hate me now, how you must hate me for hiding this for so long." Micah hugged his mother. He felt her bones against his body, so fragile they seemed they could break. A fury against the unjust fate grew inside him, mixing with the confusion and hope that Marshall's existence represented. Moving back to see her face, he held it between his hands. "Mom, listen, I could never hate you. You're all I have. But I need to understand what happened. Marshall might be the answer to the treatment you need. He has resources, and if there's any chance he's my father, we need that truth now." His voice was urgent but loving. "Please tell me what happened. Why did you run away? Why did you never tell him about me?" Tears flowed down Sylvia's face. With effort, she controlled her breathing. When she found her voice, there was an ethereal quality to it. "We were so young, so full of dreams. We met at the university library. I dropped a pile of books. He helped pick them up. It was like in the movies, one of those moments that change your life." A ghostly smile crossed her lips. 3 years together, the best of my life. Marshall had nothing then, came from a humble family, worked several jobs to support himself through university. He proposed to me with a simple ring, but to me it was worth more than any diamond. Sylvia seemed simultaneously more fragile and more present. I told my father about the engagement. He had never approved of Marshall. That night, he showed me photos. Photos of Marshall with another woman in intimate situations. He said Marshall had been cheating on me for months. I was devastated. And then I discovered I was pregnant. The world collapsed upon me. Micah absorbed every word, pieces of the puzzle of his existence finally fitting together. The pain in his mother's voice was almost physical. The revelation of the alleged betrayal brought a flash of anger directed at Marshall, quickly tempered by doubt. What if it wasn't true? "What did you do after that, Mom?" "Why didn't you confront Marshall?" he asked softly. A terrible thought occurred to him. You didn't think about not having me, did you? When you found out you were pregnant?" Sylvia recoiled as if struck by the question, horror etched on her face. "Never," she affirmed vehemently. a flash of her old strength shining through the mask of illness. "I never thought of that, my son. You were the only light in that darkness." Her body relaxed slightly. She continued then, her voice firmer. "I ran away. I took what little money I had, dropped out of university, cut contact with everyone. I moved to another city, got a job as a substitute teacher. When you were born, I knew I had made the right choice in keeping you, but the wrong choice in running away." A sob escaped her lips. "I tried to convince myself it was better this way. Years later, when I saw his name in the news, I considered getting in touch, but time had passed, and then—" Her trembling hand touched the scarf on her head. "Then came the illness, and I thought the universe was punishing me for robbing you of the chance to know your father." The silence was interrupted by the ringing of the phone. Micah answered. The voice belonged to the nurse from the clinic, where they had tried to enroll Sylvia for the experimental treatment. A spot had unexpectedly opened up. But there was a condition. The treatment needed to begin in 2 days, and full payment had to be made in advance. After answering a few questions, Micah hung up. He turned to his mother, who watched him with anxious eyes. "It was the clinic," he explained with a trembling voice. "There's a spot for the experimental treatment, but it needs to start in 2 days, and they require payment up front." A flash of determination crossed his gaze. "Mom, I need to find Marshall again. Now it's not just about the past, it's about keeping you alive. He has the resources, and if there's any possibility that he's my father, I need to try." Sylvia seemed to have aged 10 years. The mention of the treatment brought an ambiguous shine to her eyes, a mixture of hope and resignation. For a moment she seemed about to protest, but the determination on her son's face silenced her. "You have the right to know him, Micah. And he has the right to know you. If I could go back—" Her voice faltered momentarily. "If I could go back, I would have at least given him the chance to explain himself. My father, he was always manipulative. Those photos. I never questioned their authenticity." A new wave of tears welled in her eyes. "Go, find him, but prepare yourself. He may be furious, he may not believe you. I can't promise this will end well, but you're right. We need to try. For you, for me, and perhaps even for him too." The farewell was brief and emotionally charged. Micah left the apartment transformed, with a clear and urgent mission. The address of Marshall's mansion wasn't difficult to discover. The bus journey across the city was a lesson in contrasts, leaving the peripheral zone where he lived to reach the enclave of wealth where mansions competed in ostentation. The property gate was an impressive work of wrought iron, complemented by security cameras. Micah hesitated momentarily, overwhelmed not just by the physical grandeur of the place, but by the symbolism of that barrier. Taking a deep breath, he pressed the intercom button. "For you, Mom. For the 3 of us and what we could have been," he murmured to himself. No response came from the intercom. Micah pressed again. When he was about to give up, he caught the sound of an argument coming from inside the property. The voice was unmistakably Marshall's. Approaching the bars of the gate, Micah could distinguish parts of the telephone conversation. "I don't care how much it costs. Find everything about this boy and this woman. I want proof of kinship by tomorrow. Genetic test, medical records, birth certificate, everything." The order roared through the air. "I'm not interested in your excuses. If you need to bribe someone to speed up this process, do it. But I want answers immediately." The sound of something breaking followed the exclamation. Micah's blood froze. Marshall was investigating him as if they were scammers. The anger he felt was instant. After everything he had shared, there was still distrust. The image of his mother contrasted violently with Marshall's privileged fury. For a moment, Micah considered leaving, but the urgency of the situation didn't allow this luxury. Taking a deep breath, he pressed the intercom continuously. The phone discussion abruptly ceased. An irritated voice erupted through the system. "Who is it? This is private property." Micah recognized Marshall's voice. Swallowing his fear, he responded firmly, "It's me, Micah. From the sidewalk, from the hospital. We need to talk now. It's urgent. My mother. Her condition has worsened. There's a spot for treatment, but we only have 2 days." The silence that followed was tense. Finally, Marshall's voice returned. "Wait there. I'm sending a security guard." A stocky man appeared on the other side of the gate. His face was a mask of indifference as he examined Micah. Without saying a word, he typed a code on the electronic panel, allowing the gate to open partially. "Follow me," he ordered dryly. The path to the mansion was long, a road flanked by perfect gardens. The house was a monument to wealth, an imposing structure of glass, concrete, and steel. Micah followed the security guard in silence, focusing on his objective. As they approached the entrance, raised voices became audible again. The security guard hesitated, uncertain whether he should interrupt his boss. Micah stepped forward, positioning himself where he could be seen through the glass doors. The security guard blocks Micah at the mansion's gate as he shouts with all the strength of his lungs, "Please, Marshal, my mother is dying!" "She might not be lying about you, but I'm not lying about her." The characteristic smell of hospital, a mixture of disinfectant, medications, and that indefinable odor of contained illness, filled the corridors of the oncology center where Sylvia was hospitalized. Through the partially closed blinds, the golden light of dusk penetrated in delicate beams, creating a hypnotic pattern on the impeccably polished vinyl floor. Marshall remained motionless beside the bed, his gaze fixed on Sylvia's sleeping figure. His fingers occasionally adjusted the sheet or gently touched her hand, as if fearing that any firmer contact might break her. Even debilitated by disease, with pale skin and bones prominent under the thin fabric of the hospital gown, she was still unmistakably the same woman he had carried in his heart for an entire decade. The machines monitoring her vital signs emitted rhythmic beeps, a mechanical music that now meant life, hope, a second chance that Marshall never imagined he would have. "How could I live all these years without you? How did I build fortunes and empires while the true wealth was lost to me?" he whispered, more to himself than to her, his voice laden with the weight of wasted years and newly unearthed memories. The experimental treatment had begun that morning, a cutting-edge therapy that he had secretly financed as soon as he confirmed the veracity of Sylvia's condition, bypassing waiting lists and bureaucratic procedures with the power that his money and influence provided. The door of the private room opened with a soft click, and Micah entered silently. The boy seemed to have aged years in the few days since he had burst through the mansion's gate. Deep, dark circles marked his young face, testimony to sleepless nights divided between the apartment and the hospital, organizing belongings, talking with doctors, absorbing the avalanche of changes that had fallen upon his life. Marshall observed his son, with a mixture of admiration and guilt. Admiration for the strength and maturity he demonstrated despite his young age, guilt for all the missed birthdays, all the firsts he would never witness. "She's been sleeping all afternoon," he informed in a low voice, indicating the empty chair on the other side of the bed. "The doctors say it's normal, that the body needs all its energy to respond to the treatment." There was a new quality in his voice when directed at Micah, no longer the defensive hostility of their first encounter, nor the calculating suspicion of the businessman accustomed to being the target of scams, but something softer, almost reverent. "You must be exhausted too. You should rest a bit. There's a comfortable room at the end of the hall that I reserved for us. I can call you if there's any change." The suggestion came almost as a request, a man accustomed to giving orders now trying, cautiously, to establish some kind of connection, some right to show concern. Micah shook his head negatively, approaching the bed from the opposite side, his eyes never leaving his mother's sleeping face. There was a determination in him that Marshall recognized, something he saw in the mirror every day, a strength of will that he now understood was hereditary. The boy didn't completely trust him yet, and how could he? In a few days, his world had been turned upside down, the story of his origin drastically rewritten. Trust would require time, and time was something that now, finally, they could have. "I prefer to stay here," Micah replied, carefully adjusting the colorful scarf that covered Sylvia's bald head. "She was always by my side when I needed her. It's my turn now." The simple phrase contained volumes of love and loyalty that made Marshall swallow hard, a sudden emotion congesting his throat. What kind of person had his son become without his presence? What values and principles had Sylvia instilled in him, despite the difficulties, despite the illness? A shared silence fell over them, not entirely comfortable but no longer hostile. Two strangers connected by blood and by love for the same woman, learning to navigate this new emotional territory. "I spoke with your teachers," Marshall finally broke the silence. "They understood the situation and will send the school material so you don't fall behind. When you're ready, you can return to classes at the same school if you prefer, or wherever you choose." The look of surprise that Micah gave Marshall revealed that the boy didn't expect such consideration. Perhaps he expected to be uprooted from his familiar world and transplanted directly into the privileged universe of his newly discovered biological father. The idea that he could maintain some continuity, some connection with his previous life, clearly caught him off guard. Before he could respond, Marshall reached for an elegant folder on the side table and removed a sealed envelope. For a moment he held it as if the paper contained something precious and fragile, which in a way it was. The test confirmed it. "You are my son," he said simply, extending the envelope across the bed. "But I already knew even before the results arrived. Your eyes. They're exactly like my father's, and your chin, the way you lift it when you're determined to achieve something. That you inherited from me." A hesitant smile, the first that Micah had seen on the businessman's usually serious face, briefly softened his features. "There's more I need to tell you, about the past, about what really happened." Marshall moved to sit on the edge of the bed, his proximity to Sylvia a silent testimony that, even unconscious, she continued to be the gravitational center that kept them in orbit. "I never betrayed your mother, not once. I was young and ambitious, yes, focused on building a future for us, perhaps working more than I should have, but my heart always belonged only to her." Micah's eyebrows furrowed, the confusion evident on his young face as he absorbed the statement. "But what about the photos? Mom said my grandfather showed photos of you with another woman," he questioned, his tone a mixture of skepticism and hope. Marshall nodded gravely, his face hardening with the memory. "Your grandfather never accepted our relationship. I came from a humble family, worked as a waiter to pay for college. In his view, I wasn't good enough for the daughter he wanted to see married to someone of established social position. I tried to prove my worth, saved every penny I earned, studied to exhaustion to get the best grades." A shadow of bitterness crossed his gaze as he continued. "Months after Sylvia disappeared, I discovered by chance that he had hired a woman to seduce me, to create a compromising situation. The photos were real but completely manipulated, an elaborate trap that I didn't even notice until it was too late. I never imagined he could go so far to separate us." Marshall's voice trembled slightly now, the emotional control typical of the ruthless businessman completely absent. "If I could go back in time, I would have fought harder, searched more diligently. Maybe if I had found her sooner." A subtle movement from the figure in the bed interrupted the painful confession. Sylvia's eyes opened slowly, consciousness returning gradually. For a moment she seemed disoriented, her gaze wandering around the room until finding first Micah, a weak smile illuminating her exhausted face, and then Marshall. The sight of him sitting so close provoked a complex expression, surprise, old pain, and something else, something that made her eyes instantly well up with tears. "It wasn't a dream then," she murmured, her voice hoarse and weak. "You really met each other." Marshall took her hand between his with reverent gentleness. "Yes, we met, and now we're all together, as we should have been all these years." Micah moved to the other side, completing the family circle that had been broken for so long. Tears were flowing freely down Sylvia's face now, decades of hurt, regret, and now, finally, hope finding release. "Forgive me, both of you," she whispered, squeezing each one's hand. "For my cowardice, for not questioning, for running away instead of confronting. I stole so much from both of you." Marshall shook his head, gently interrupting her. "There wasn't just you and me in that equation. Your father manipulated all of us. What matters is that now we have a chance to recover something of what we lost, to build something new from here." The door opened again, this time revealing a doctor with a grave expression, accompanied by a nurse carrying a digital clipboard. Micah recognized the oncologist responsible for the experimental treatment, the doctor who had explained in detail the risks and possibilities of the innovative therapy. Something in the professional's tense posture made the boy's heart race. The doctor approached the bed, his eyes quickly assessing the monitors before addressing everyone. "I have news about the initial results," he said, his tone carefully neutral, professional. "The treatment is not responding as we hoped. The cancer cells are showing resistance to the standard protocol we're using." A heavy silence followed the announcement, fear palpable in the air. Sylvia briefly closed her eyes, as if absorbing one more blow in a long series of lost battles. Marshall, however, straightened up, his posture instantly changing to that of an executive accustomed to facing crises. "What are the alternatives?" "There must be other protocols, other approaches," he demanded, the emotional vulnerability of moments before now, hidden under a cloak of pragmatic determination. The doctor hesitated only a moment before continuing. "There is a more aggressive option, but it requires a compatible donor. We need a bone marrow transfusion immediately to enhance the effect of the medications and give Sylvia's body a chance at recovery." Marshall and Micah exchanged identical looks of determination. "Test us," they said almost in unison, a synchronicity that, under other circumstances, might have been comical. The doctor shook his head, an expression of regret softening his features. "We've already done preliminary tests when the initial samples were collected. Unfortunately, neither of you is compatible to the necessary degree. We need a direct relative with greater compatibility, or search the National Donor Registry, which could take too much time considering the current state." Sylvia emitted a choked sound, part sob, part resignation. Micah felt despair growing. The image of his mother finally reunited with his father, only to lose her now, was unbearable. Marshall, however, remained still for only a moment before pulling out his phone. His fingers slid across the screen, locating a contact that clearly wasn't frequently used. "There's someone who might be compatible," he declared, his tone revealing that this wasn't an option he considered with pleasure. "My brother Spencer. We haven't spoken in many years after a family dispute over our father's company. But if there's a chance..." Without waiting for a response, he pressed the call button, putting the phone on speaker mode. The silence in the room was absolute, as the phone rang once, twice, 3 times. When a male voice finally answered, a voice surprisingly similar to Marshall's, though with a softer tone, the tension was palpable. "Marshall?" The single word carried years of distance and distrust. Marshall breathed deeply, his gaze never leaving Sylvia's worried face. "Spencer, I need your help. It's a medical emergency. I found Sylvia after all these years, and she has advanced leukemia. We need a compatible bone marrow donor immediately." The brevity and urgency of the information, without preambles or attempts to smooth over years of estrangement, revealed the gravity of the situation. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for several agonizing seconds. When Spencer finally responded, his voice had subtly changed. "Sylvia? That Sylvia? The one who disappeared?" A meaningful pause before he continued. "How long do I have to get there?" The simple response, devoid of hesitation at the mention of the medical emergency, made Marshall's tense shoulders visibly relax. "As quickly as possible. I'll send a car, a helicopter, whatever is necessary." Spencer replied with a firmness that echoed his brother's determination. "I'll be there in 2 hours. Send the address, and Marshall, stay strong." The compatibility test brought news that seemed almost miraculous in its perfection. Spencer was an ideal donor, with high levels of compatibility rarely found outside of twin siblings. The procedure was performed immediately, without the usual waits and preparations that hospital protocols normally required. Marshall's financial resources eliminated any bureaucratic obstacle, while Spencer's determination to help, not just a stranger in need, but someone who had meant so much to his brother, provided the final element necessary for what doctors would later describe as a perfect confluence of favorable circumstances. The aggressive treatment, enhanced by the compatible bone marrow transfusion, began to show results in the first weeks. Recovery wasn't instantaneous or easy. There were days of high fever, debilitating side effects, torturous doubts about whether they had made the right decision. But gradually, cell by cell, Sylvia began to respond, color slowly returning to her cheeks, her strength increasing almost imperceptibly at first, then more visibly. Months passed. Seasons changed outside while inside Marshall's mansion, now renovated to accommodate his new family, a small miracle unfolded daily. The area that was once cold and impersonal, decorated to impress but not to welcome, had been transformed. Books now filled shelves that previously displayed only art objects chosen by professional decorators. A piano that had remained silent for years sounded again, with Micah revealing a musical talent he had inherited from somewhere in the family lineage. The master bedroom, once a lonely and functional space, now contained evidence of a feminine presence. A perfume on the dressing table, a shawl casually thrown over an armchair, 2 toothbrushes side by side in the bathroom. Spencer, initially a hesitant visitor to that house he once considered enemy territory, now appeared regularly for family dinners, the old rivalry dissolved in the shared crisis and subsequent joy of Sylvia's recovery. It was during one of these dinners, when autumn painted the garden trees golden red, that Marshall finally found the courage for the gesture he had been planning for weeks. Sylvia was sitting at the table, her hair, now growing again in short, soft curls, capturing the soft light of the candelabras. She wore a simple but elegant dress, her figure still thin but no longer fragile, gradually recovering the curves that illness had stolen. Micah was animatedly talking about a school project, his excellent grades a source of pride for both parents, when Marshall suddenly stood up. Silence fell over the table as he went to a small cabinet in the corner of the dining room, returning with a small velvet box worn by time. Without words, he knelt before Sylvia, who brought her hands to her mouth in a gesture of surprise. "I bought this ring more than 10 years ago," said Marshall, his voice laden with emotion as he opened the box, revealing a modest but elegantly and classically designed solitaire. "It's not the most expensive or impressive I could buy today, but it represents our beginning, our dreams, our love, before everything was complicated by misunderstandings and separations. We lost a lot of time apart, Sylvia. I don't want to lose even one more second." The proposal hung in the air, carrying the weight of decades of interrupted and now reborn love. Sylvia, tears flowing freely down her face, extended her trembling hand. "Yes," she simply whispered, as Marshall slid the ring onto her finger. Micah, unable to contain his own emotion, launched himself into an embrace that enveloped both, completing the once broken family circle. Sylvia, wrapped in the arms of the 2 most important men in her life, closed her eyes in absolute contentment. "Finally," she said through tears of joy, "we are complete." If Micah and Marshall's story moved you, don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment where you're from. And don't go anywhere. The next story is already appearing on screen, made especially for you. See you soon. The afternoon sun drew elongated shadows on the wooden floor of the spacious farmhouse porch. Mary Claire, a 17-year-old girl with long black hair that framed her delicate face with indigenous features, contemplated the horizon with teary eyes. In her trembling hands, she held a paper that seemed to weigh a ton, the result of the medical exam that confirmed her pregnancy of almost 3 months. The gentle wind swayed her simple cotton dress as she tried to gather courage to face her father. Tears silently rolled down her tanned face, and she whispered to herself like a mantra, "I have to be strong, for me and my baby. Mum would give me courage if she were here." Mary Claire took a deep breath and entered the main farmhouse, an imposing structure that displayed the wealth her family had accumulated over generations. The interior was decorated with antique and valuable furniture, silent witnesses to the history of that family. In the main room, her father, August, a 50-year-old man with graying hair and a face marked by work in the sun, was sitting at the large, solid wooden table, analyzing papers with an increasingly somber expression. Mary Claire observed him for a few seconds before announcing her presence, noticing how her father's broad shoulders seemed bent under the weight of worries. The deep wrinkles on his forehead revealed that the news wasn't good. She hesitated at the door, her heart beating so hard it seemed to want to leap from her chest. August looked up and saw her standing there, with the crumpled paper in her hands and her face wet with tears. "What happened, daughter? Why are you crying like this?" he asked, momentarily forgetting his own problems. "Dad, I have something very serious to tell you," Mary Claire began, her voice failing as she approached the table. The smell of leather and earth permeated the environment, mixing with the aroma of coffee that her father always kept beside him during his afternoons of work. She placed the exam result on the table next to the farm's accounting books. August looked at the paper without initially understanding, until his eyes caught the words that changed everything. Positive result. pregnancy confirmed. His face, previously concerned, transformed into a mask of shock and then anger. He rose abruptly, causing the wooden chair to scrape across the floor with a strident noise. "This must be a lie. How could you do this to me? To our family?" he vociferated, as Mary Claire took a step back, frightened by her father's explosive reaction. "It was an accident, Dad. Justin and I, we loved each other," Mary Claire tried to explain, as tears returned forcefully. The mention of her boyfriend's name seemed to inflame August's anger even more, who now paced the room like a caged animal. His clenched fists and red face betrayed the storm forming inside him. The farmer suddenly stopped and faced his daughter, with eyes that seemed to shoot flames. "And where is that boy now? Why isn't he here taking responsibility for what he did?" he questioned, his voice thundering through the spacious room. Mary Claire lowered her eyes, feeling the weight of shame and abandonment. The silence that followed was more painful than any scream. He ran away yesterday when I told him about the baby. He said he wasn't ready to be a father and that his family would never accept it, she finally confessed, feeling as if each word was a blade cutting her heart. "Coward son of a... son." August restrained himself before completing the insult, but his face contorted with fury made his thoughts clear. He approached the table again and grabbed the papers he had been analyzing, waving them in the air as if they were evidence of a crime. "Do you know what these papers are, Mary Claire? They're the farm's accounts. We're on the brink of ruin because of the drought that has lasted for months. The cattle are dying, the crops are dry. And now this?" He threw the papers on the table forcefully, causing some to slide and fall to the floor. Mary Claire had never seen her father so out of control. He had always been a proud man, who maintained his composure even in the most difficult situations. August ran his hands through his grey hair, pulling it slightly in a gesture of despair. "I worked my entire life to build all this, to secure our future, and now I see everything crumbling before my eyes. And you bring this shame into my house." The heavy silence that followed was interrupted only by the ticking of the old clock on the wall and Mary Claire's contained crying. She tried to approach her father, extending her hand in a gesture of supplication. "Dad, I know I made a mistake, but it's your grandson or granddaughter I'm carrying. Please, help me. I have nowhere to go," she begged, her voice choked. August stepped back as if his daughter's touch could burn him. His eyes, once full of fury, now conveyed a coldness that cut deeper into Mary Claire's heart than any cruel word. He walked to a desk drawer, opened it, and removed a small envelope. "Everyone in town will talk. The proud farmer August, who spoke so much of honor and tradition, now has an unmarried and pregnant daughter," he muttered, more to himself than to Mary Claire. "My reputation, built over decades, destroyed in an instant." August threw the envelope on the table. The sound of paper meeting wood echoed in the silent room like a gunshot. Inside were some bills and coins, all he could spare in that moment of financial crisis. "Gather your things and disappear from this house," he shouted, his eyes filled with rage and hurt. "I didn't raise a daughter to shame me like this." The words hit Mary Claire like physical blows, making her stagger. She looked at her father, searching for some sign of regret, some crack in the armor of wounded pride he wore, but found only determination and coldness. Tears now flowed freely down the young woman's face, blurring her vision. She took the envelope with trembling hands, knowing that money was all she would have to restart her life. "Dad, please don't do this. Mom would never forgive you for throwing me out like this." She tried one last time, mentioning her mother who had died years earlier. The mention of his dead wife seemed to shake August for a moment. A flash of pain crossed his gaze, but was quickly replaced by the same hard expression. "Don't use your mother to manipulate me. She would be as disappointed as I am," he replied, turning his back to not show his own emotion that threatened to break his facade of rigidity. Mary Claire felt her legs weaken, but gathered what dignity she had left and walked slowly to her room. Each step was like walking on broken glass. Each breath hurt as if the air was laden with thorns. She opened the door to the room that had been her sanctuary throughout her life and looked around, knowing it would be the last time. With mechanical movements, she opened a small suitcase and began to put in some clothes, choosing practical and durable pieces, ignoring the pretty dresses her father had given her in happier times. Among the essential items, she saved her mother's photograph. the only truly valuable object she owned. The image smiled from inside the simple frame, the same eyes as Mary Claire's shining with kindness. "Mum, give me strength to move forward," she murmured, caressing the glass of the frame as if she could touch the face of the woman she missed so much at that moment. When Mary Claire came down the stairs with a small suitcase, she found the room empty. She looked around one last time, committing to memory every detail of that place that had been her home. The envelope with the money remained on the table, untouched. She picked it up and put it in her dress pocket, feeling the weight of that forced charity. With slow steps, she headed to the front door, secretly hoping that her father would appear to prevent her from leaving, to say he had changed his mind. But the silence of the house was deafening, interrupted only by the occasional creaking of the old wood and by the wind that was beginning to blow stronger outside. As she stepped onto the porch, Mary Claire noticed that the sky, previously clear, was now loaded with dark and threatening clouds. The irony did not escape her. The storm forming in the sky was a perfect reflection of the storm in her life. She closed the door behind her without looking back, descended the porch steps and began walking along the dirt path that led to the main gate of the farm. Each step took her away from the only world she knew, leading her to an uncertain and frightening future. The sky darkened quickly, as if night was in a hurry to fall upon the world. When Mary Claire reached the wooden gate that delimited the property, the first heavy drops of rain began to fall, marking the dry earth with small craters. She opened the gate and passed to the other side, symbolically crossing the boundary between her old life and the unknown that awaited her. The rain intensified with each second, soaking her clothes and hair. Mary Claire looked back one last time, toward the farmhouse. Through the curtain of rain, she could make out the silhouette of her father in the living room window. For a moment, she felt a pang of hope. Perhaps he had regretted, perhaps he was about to call her back. But then she saw August closing the curtains with a brusque movement, literally turning his back on her and her desperate situation. That final gesture of rejection pierced her heart like a sharp dagger. "Goodbye, Father," she whispered to herself, the words lost in the noise of the rain that now fell violently. "One day you'll realize that you lost not only a daughter, but also a grandchild." The rural road was quickly turning into a muddy mess under the torrential rain. Mary Claire walked with difficulty, the small suitcase weighing in her hand, her shoes sinking into the mud with each step. Water ran down her face, mixing with the tears that wouldn't stop falling. Her thoughts were a confused whirlwind. Where to go? Who could help her? What would become of her and the baby she carried? The nearest town was several kilometers away, and she wasn't sure if she could make it there in these conditions. The dark sky was periodically illuminated by lightning, followed by deafening thunder, adding to the scene of despair. Suddenly, a car's headlight cut through the darkness, approaching rapidly. Mary Claire felt a flash of hope. Perhaps she could ask for a ride. She positioned herself at the edge of the road, waving desperately, but the vehicle didn't slow down. On the contrary, as it passed through a large puddle, it sent a wave of mud that hit Mary Claire full on, soaking her even more and dirtying her already wet clothes. The car continued on, disappearing into the darkness of the stormy night, leaving behind only the trail of its taillights and a young woman even more helpless. "Even strangers treat me as if I'm worthless," she muttered, trying to clean the mud from her face and dress uselessly. It was in this moment of absolute despair that Mary Claire realized something was wrong. Instinctively, she touched the pocket of her dress where she had kept the envelope with the money. The pocket was empty. Seized by panic, she began to frantically check her other pockets, the suitcase, even looking at the muddy ground around her. Nothing. The envelope had disappeared, probably fallen during the walk, or when she was hit by the mud from the passing car. A moan of despair escaped her lips as she fell to her knees in the mud, overcome by the weight of the situation. She was alone, pregnant, without money, and in the middle of a violent storm. No family, no friends, no resources. For the first time since receiving the news of her pregnancy, Mary Claire felt the full weight of reality. It wasn't just about her now. There was a life inside her, an innocent life that depended entirely on her decisions and her ability to survive. She embraced her own belly in a protective gesture, feeling a new determination arise amid the despair. "We'll survive, my baby," she promised, struggling to get up from the mud. "I don't know how, I don't know where, but we'll find a way. It's just the two of us now, and I'll fight for you with all my strength." The rain continued to fall mercilessly. The wind howled through the trees, and the path ahead was dark and uncertain. But Mary Claire took one step forward, then another and another. Each step was a silent promise to the child she carried, an affirmation that even in the most adverse circumstances, she would find the strength to move forward. The road stretched before her, losing itself in the darkness of the stormy night, leading her to a future she could not predict. But in her heart was a certainty. This would not be the last page of her story. "One day, I'll return to this farm," she thought with a determination that surprised even herself. "And when that day comes, I will no longer be the same Mary Claire who is being expelled today. I will be stronger, wiser, and I will show my father the true meaning of family and forgiveness." Months later, the corridor of the municipal hospital gleamed under the fluorescent light, reflecting on the floor that Mary Claire had just cleaned. Her movements were careful, calculated not to demand too much effort from her body, increasingly heavy from the advanced pregnancy. The prominent 8-month belly stretched the simple janitor's uniform as she maneuvered the mop with the practice acquired during months of hard work. Her face, once youthful and carefree, now carried deep dark circles, silent witnesses to sleepless nights and constant worry about the future. Her hair, once loose and shiny, was now tied in a simple and lifeless bun. Despite the evident fatigue, her eyes still retained a fierce determination, the same that had kept her alive since that stormy night when she was expelled from home. Mary Claire stopped for a moment, leaning on the mop handle to relieve the pain in her back, and caressed her belly tenderly. "We're almost there, my love. Soon you'll be in my arms, and I promise I'll do everything so you can have a better life than mine," she whispered to the baby moving inside her, as if responding to the sound of his mother's voice. Serious voices echoed down the hallway, coming from the doctor's meeting room. Mary Claire didn't intend to hear other people's conversations, but the words reached her with worrying clarity. The doctors were discussing the precarious situation of the hospital, lack of medications, obsolete equipment, insufficient staff. She continued cleaning, involuntarily approaching the partially open door. "With these budget cuts, I don't know how we're going to keep the maternity ward functioning properly. We're already operating at the limit," said a deep, tired male voice that Mary Claire recognized as Dr. Paul, the chief physician of the obstetrics wing. "We have high-risk pregnant women arriving every day, and we don't have enough resources to care for them," he continued, the frustration evident in his voice. Mary Claire felt a shiver run down her spine. She knew she would be one of those mothers soon, completely dependent on the precarious structure of the public hospital. A knot formed in her throat as dark thoughts invaded her mind. What if there were complications? What if the baby needed special care? Without family, without resources, she and her child would be at the mercy of luck and the goodwill of others. "Even if the whole world turns its back on you, my child, your mother will never abandon you. If necessary, I'll work 3 jobs, but you will have everything you need," she silently vowed, feeling the baby move as if in response to her promise. The shift seemed endless that day. With each corridor cleaned, Mary Claire felt her strength diminishing. The weight of her belly, the lower back pain, and the lack of adequate sleep were beginning to take their toll. She had slept only 4 hours the night before, worried about the rent for the small room at the back of Sarah's house. The nurse had been her salvation when she arrived in town, penniless and desperate. She found her crying on a bench in the central square, soaked by rain, and offered her shelter. It was also Sarah who got her the cleaning job at the hospital. Mary Claire owed everything to that middle-aged, lonely woman with a generous heart, who treated her almost like a daughter. However, the feeling of being a burden constantly weighed on her shoulders. Her father's cruel words still echoed in her mind in moments of weakness. "I didn't raise a daughter to embarrass me like this." She shook her head, trying to push away the painful memories, and continued pushing the cleaning cart down the hall. A doctor rushed past, almost knocking over the cleaning products. He didn't even look at her. She was invisible, like all the cleaning staff. "One day people will look at me with respect. People will look. My son will be proud to say I am his mother, and he will never know how much I struggled and suffered to give him a dignified life," she promised herself, as she watched the doctor disappear around the corner of the hallway, completely oblivious to her existence. The world suddenly began to spin. The corridor lights seemed to multiply and dance before Mary Claire's eyes. Cold sweat covered her forehead, while a feeling of nausea rose up her throat. She tried to lean on the cleaning cart, but her knees gave way. The mop slipped from her hands and fell to the floor with a dull thud. She would have fallen too, if it weren't for the strong arms that supported her at the last moment. "Mary Claire, what's happening? Talk to me." The concerned voice belonged to Sarah, who was passing through the corridor at that providential moment. The nurse, a robust woman with a kind face and graying hair, held Mary Claire firmly, preventing her from completely fainting. Other people began to gather around, attracted by the commotion. Mary Claire tried to respond, but the words wouldn't come out. Her legs seemed made of cotton, and dark spots danced in her vision. "Call Dr. Paul, quickly," ordered Sarah, her normally sweet voice now laden with authority. "She's a high-risk pregnancy, almost fainting. We need to take her to an examination room immediately." Mary Claire felt herself being guided to a stretcher. Gentle hands helped her lie down, while concerned voices discussed around her. The last thing she saw before closing her eyes was Sarah's anguished face, holding her hand as if through that touch she could transmit the strength that Mary Claire lacked at that moment. When Mary Claire fully regained consciousness, she was lying in a hospital ward bed. An IV dripped slowly, connected to her arm by a needle. Dr. Paul, a middle-aged man with graying hair at the temples and thin-framed glasses, examined her medical chart with a grave expression. Upon noticing she had awakened, he approached the bed. "Mary Claire, you gave us quite a scare," he said, adjusting his glasses on his nose. "Your blood pressure is dangerously high, and tests indicate severe anemia. These are very serious complications in pregnancy, both for you and the baby." Mary Claire tried to sit up, but dizziness forced her to lie down again. Her concern for the baby was so intense, it almost overshadowed the fear for her own health. "My baby. Is he all right, doctor?" she asked, her voice trembling with anxiety. The doctor held her hand gently, a professional gesture but loaded with humanity. "For now, yes. But if you continue like this, both of you are at risk. You need to rest and eat better," he warned her, seriously. "Your baby is at risk, Mary Claire. Your body is fighting to keep both of you alive, but it's not receiving the necessary nutrients. You need absolute rest and proper nutrition in the coming weeks, or the consequences could be severe." Tears began to stream down Mary Claire's pale face. She knew the doctor was right, but the cruel reality of her situation didn't allow the luxury of rest. Each working day meant food on the table and a roof over her head. If she stopped, she would lose everything again. "Doctor, I can't stop working," she explained, her voice choked with tears. "If I lose this job, I won't be able to support myself. I'm already a burden to Sarah. If I don't pay rent for the small room, I'll have nowhere to live when the baby is born." The desperation in her voice was palpable, causing the doctor to furrow his brow, visibly disturbed by the situation. Mary Claire continued, the words coming out in a painful outburst. "I have no family, nowhere to go. My father kicked me out when he found out about the pregnancy, and my child's father ran away. I'm completely alone in this world, doctor. This job is all I have. It's the only thing that allows me to dream of a future for my child." Her hands caressed her prominent belly as she spoke, as if trying to protect the baby from the harsh truths they were forced to face. Dr. Paul sighed deeply, removing his glasses to massage the bridge of his nose, a gesture that denoted both fatigue and compassion. He had seen many sad stories during his long career, but something in that young mother's determination touched him in a special way. Replacing his glasses, the doctor pulled up a chair and sat beside the bed. "Mary Claire, I understand your situation, but you need to grasp the severity of what's happening," he said, softening his tone of voice. "We're not just talking about fatigue or temporary indisposition. Your anemia is severe, and the elevated pressure could lead to preeclampsia, which would put your life and the baby's in real danger." He paused, carefully choosing his next words. "Perhaps we can find a middle ground. I'll prescribe vitamins and supplements that will help with the anemia, and we can try to reorganize your work schedule for lighter shifts." Mary Claire observed the doctor with a mixture of gratitude and distrust. Life had taught her that help rarely came without a price. "Why are you helping me so much, doctor? I'm just a cleaner." There are so many more important patients, she questioned, her voice low and hesitant. Dr. Paul smiled slightly, a tired smile, but genuine. You know, Mary Claire, for a real doctor, there are no more or less important patients. Each life we can save or improve is equally valuable. He stood up and walked to a cabinet, from which he took out some boxes of medication. These vitamins and iron supplements should only be distributed with a paid prescription, but I'll register them as free samples. He placed the medications on the small table next to the bed and continued, As for your work, I'll speak with supervision. I'll explain that you need less strenuous tasks by medical recommendation. It's not ideal, but it's the best we can do given the circumstances. Mary Claire felt a wave of relief mixed with deep gratitude. It was more than she expected, more than she believed she deserved. Tears returned to her eyes, but this time they were different, not of despair, but of hope. Dr. Paul, I don't know how to thank you. I promise that as soon as my baby is born and I can return to work normally, I'll repay you somehow, she said, holding the doctor's hand in an impulsive gesture of gratitude. Night had fallen when Mary Claire finally returned to the small room at the back of Sarah's house. The space was tiny but clean and organized, a reflection of her struggle to maintain some dignity amidst adversities. A twin bed, a nightstand, a small dresser, and a small table with a chair made up all the furniture. In a corner there was a second-hand crib that Sarah had obtained from a hospital donation, the first gift for the baby that would soon arrive. Mary Claire sat carefully on the bed, exhausted after the tumultuous day. Sarah had insisted that she rest for the remainder of the week, promising to explain the situation to the hospital supervision. Her eyes wandered around the room, stopping at the small crib. It was hard to believe that in less than a month, her child would be there, completely dependent on her to survive. The weight of this responsibility was terrifying, and at the same time what kept her moving forward. A local newspaper on the small table caught her attention. Sarah must have left it there while Mary Claire was in the hospital. Driven by curiosity and the desire for distraction, she stretched out her arm to grab it. The headline on the front page made her heart race. Traditional farm will be auctioned for debts. The photo showed the entrance to her father's property, the same gate through which she had left on that rainy night, expelled and helpless. Farmer August, known for his pride and standing in the community, lost his battle against debts accumulated during the prolonged drought, said the article. The property, one of the most traditional in the region, will go to auction next month. Mary Claire let the newspaper fall onto her lap, a whirlwind of contradictory emotions taking over her chest. On one hand, she felt a bitter satisfaction. The pride that had led her father to reject her was now making him lose everything. The irony didn't escape her. While he was losing the farm, she was building a new life brick by brick, sacrifice by sacrifice. It was a kind of poetic justice that the same pride that led him to expel his own pregnant daughter from home now left him with nothing. However, mixed with this feeling of vindication was a deep sadness. Despite everything, that farm was part of her history, the place where she grew up, where her mother had lived and died, childhood memories, the green fields before the drought, the smell of the kitchen on Sunday mornings, all would be lost, sold to strangers who would never know the emotional value of those lands. And her father, the strong and authoritarian man she had always known, now faced the public humiliation of seeing his empire crumble. Mary Claire felt hot tears streaming down her face, surprised by her own reaction. After all he had done, why did she still care? Why does it still hurt, Mom? She whispered to her mother's photo, the only object she had brought from the farm. He expelled me as if I were a sick animal, denied me help when I needed it most, and yet I can't completely hate him. Is this what it means to be family? This bond that hurts even when broken? A sudden sharp pain in her lower abdomen interrupted her thoughts, making her let out an involuntary moan. It was as if a knife was being twisted inside her, a sensation completely different from the normal discomforts of pregnancy. Mary Claire gasped, waiting for the pain to pass, but instead it intensified. Instinctively she realized that something was very wrong. Panic took over her immediately, upon realizing she was having complications with the pregnancy. Panic took over her immediately. She was bleeding a lot, and knew what that meant. "No, please no," she begged aloud, As if by force of will she could stop what was happening. "My baby, no, please, stay with me." She tried to get up to reach the phone on the small table, but another violent contraction hit her, causing her to fall to her knees on the floor. The pain was so intense she could barely breathe. "Help!" she screamed, even knowing that Sarah had left for the night shift at the hospital, and there was no one to hear her desperate cries. The situation was rapidly worsening. With superhuman effort, Mary Claire tried to drag herself toward the phone, each movement a struggle against the pain and weakness she felt. Each movement was an agony, each centimeter a battle. "I'm not going to lose you," she muttered through clenched teeth, speaking to the baby as if it could hear her. "I've fought too hard, sacrificed too much to lose you now. Please, hold on just a little longer." The phone seemed to be miles away, although it was just a few meters. Mary Claire felt her strength rapidly diminishing. Her vision was beginning to blur and she struggled to maintain consciousness. Desperation grew with each second. She was alone, bleeding profusely, unable to reach help. Terrible thoughts invaded her mind. What if she died there on that cold floor with no one to help? What if her child died before even having a chance to live? All the sacrifices, all the struggle would have been in vain. "I can't give up now," she told herself, gathering the last of her remaining strength. With fierce determination, she continued dragging herself toward the phone, inch by inch, ignoring the excruciating pain and paralyzing fear. Each movement was an act of pure will, guided by desperate love for the life she carried within. "We will survive," she repeated like a mantra, her voice growing weaker. "We will survive because we have to survive. Because you deserve to live, my child. Because you deserve more than to end like this, before you even begin." The phone was now just inches from her outstretched fingers. Mary Claire made one final effort, stretching her arm as far as she could, her muscles trembling with exertion. Her nails scraped the device, almost managing to grab it, but not enough to bring it closer. The world spun faster and faster around her, and darkness began to swallow her. The last thing she felt before losing consciousness was the baby's movement inside her. A kick, as if protesting against the cruel fate that awaited them. "Forgive me," whispered Mary Claire as darkness completely enveloped her. "Your mother tried. God, how I tried." Some time later, golden morning light filtered through the simple curtains of the small apartment, illuminating the kitchen table where Mary Claire and Michael were having breakfast. The apartment, though modest, was clean and welcoming, a true home built with sacrifice and love. The living room walls displayed Michael's colorful drawings and his photos at different ages, documenting the growth of the boy who now turned 8. Mary Claire watched her son as he devoured his pancakes with enthusiasm. Michael was a bright boy with lively eyes and an easy smile, with the same delicate features she had in her youth, but with a curiosity and vivacity that were exclusively his. Anyone looking at that domestic scene would never imagine the obstacles Mary Claire had overcome to get there. After that terrible night when she almost lost her baby, she fought with all her strength to survive and give birth to her son. Thanks to Sarah, who found her unconscious and quickly took her to the hospital, both survived. Since then, Mary Claire dedicated herself tirelessly to her studies, graduating in nursing while working and raising her son. Now she was the head nurse of the pediatric ward at the same hospital where she once worked as a janitor. "Mum, can I take my new science book to show my teacher today? I think she'll like to see the experiments I marked," asked Michael, interrupting Mary Claire's thoughts. She smiled with pride. Her son was already showing interest in science, and she made a point of encouraging him in everything. "Of course you can, my love. I'm sure your teacher will be impressed with your interest." The phone rang, breaking the tranquility of that routine morning. Mary Claire frowned. It was only 7 in the morning, too early for work calls. She rose from the table and answered cautiously. "Hello, who's speaking?" The voice on the other end of the line was trembling and elderly, but strangely familiar, like a distant echo of a life Mary Claire had left behind. "Mary Claire, is that really you? Thank God I found you after searching for so long." It was Dorothy, the former maid from her father's farm, the woman who had cared for her throughout her childhood after her mother's death. Mary Claire felt her heart race as a whirlwind of long-repressed memories came rushing back. "Dorothy, how did you find me?" she asked, moving away slightly so Michael wouldn't hear the conversation. Her voice trembled slightly, betraying the emotion she was trying to control. The elderly woman on the other end of the line sobbed before responding. "It wasn't easy, my girl. Years of searching, asking around. A nurse named Sarah finally told me where you were after I explained the situation. Mary Claire, I'm calling about your father." The mention of August made Mary Claire stiffen, her body instantly tensing. 8 years had passed since that rainy night, but the pain of rejection still burned like a poorly healed wound. What happened to him? Finally lost everything because of his arrogance. The words came out harsher than she intended, loaded with resentment she had never completely overcome. "He's dying, Mary Claire." Dorothy's voice broke completely. "He's been hospitalized for 2 weeks with severe kidney failure. The doctors say without an urgent transplant, he won't survive more than a month." The old maid paused, during which Mary Claire could hear her restrained crying. "He's in the municipal hospital, Mary Claire, in the same hospital where you work, from what I've been told. He doesn't know you're there, doesn't know I have your contact. I'm calling in secret because, despite everything that happened, I know you have a good heart, just like your mother had." The impact of those words hit Mary Claire like a physical blow. Her father, the man who had thrown her out of the house in her most vulnerable moment, was now equally vulnerable, depending on the help of strangers to survive. The irony of the situation didn't escape her. She felt the weight of Michael's curious gaze, who observed her expression transformed by the unexpected news. Is he alone?" she finally asked, her voice low. Dorothy sighed on the other end of the line. "Completely alone, my child. After he lost the farm, he distanced himself from everyone. Pride, always pride. He wouldn't even allow me to stay by his side in recent years. I only found out he was hospitalized because an old acquaintance informed me. When I visited him, he was unconscious, connected to so many machines. He's no longer the strong man you knew, Mary Claire. He's withering away each day." The old maid made a significant pause before continuing. "He never admitted it, but I know that during all these years, his greatest regret was sending you away. He tried to find you after he lost everything, but it was too late. You had disappeared." Mary Claire hung up the phone with trembling hands. She felt dazed, as if the world around her was spinning rapidly. Her father was dying in the same hospital where she had worked for years. How many times might she have passed near him without knowing? The idea that they might have crossed paths, unknown to each other, caused a strange sensation in her chest. She returned to the table where Michael was watching her with curious eyes. "Who was it, Mum? You look like you've seen a ghost," commented the boy, perceptive as always. Mary Claire forced a smile, trying to regain her composure. "It was an old family acquaintance, darling. Nothing important." Lying to her son wasn't something she liked to do, but she wasn't ready to explain the complexity of the situation. Michael had never known about his grandfather, about the rejection, about the rainy night when his mother was thrown out of the house. For him, the story had always been simple. His biological father had left before his birth, and his mother had raised him alone, with the help of good friends like Sarah and Dr. Paul. She had never mentioned the existence of a grandfather, a farm, a lost family inheritance. Throughout the day at work, Mary Claire couldn't concentrate. The news about her father occupied every inch of her thoughts. Several times, she was on the verge of going up to the nephrology floor, only to hesitate at the last moment. "What should I do, Mother?" she whispered to herself while organizing medical records. "He threw me out when I needed him most, tossed me onto the street without caring if we would live or die. Should I simply forget that? Should I forgive a man who never asked for forgiveness?" The shift was almost ending when Mary Claire finally gathered the courage to go up to the nephrology department. She told herself it was just curiosity, that she only wanted to see with her own eyes the state of her father. Nothing more, no commitments, no reconciliations, just an observation. Her heart was beating erratically as the elevator slowly ascended. When the doors opened, she hesitated for a moment before stepping into the hallway. The nephrology sector was quiet and aseptic, dominated by the constant hum of dialysis machines. Mary Claire advanced cautiously, checking the names on the room doors. Finally, she found what she was looking for. "August," said the simple nameplate. The door was ajar, allowing her to see inside. Her father was lying in bed, looking much smaller and more fragile than in her memories. His face, once ruddy and full of life, was now pale and marked by deep wrinkles. His hair, completely white, contrasted with his yellowish skin. Tubes and wires connected his body to various machines that beeped regularly. Mary Claire felt a lump in her throat. That weakened man on the verge of death was almost unrecognizable. Where was the proud and authoritarian farmer who had expelled her from home? What remained of him now? As if sensing her presence, August slowly opened his eyes and turned his face toward the door. For a brief moment, their gazes met, past and present, colliding in an instant suspended in time. Mary Claire saw a flash of recognition in her father's tired eyes, a glimmer of surprise and something more. Regret, perhaps. Before he could say anything, she turned and walked away quickly, her heart beating so hard it seemed to want to jump out of her chest. 8 years have passed and I still run from him like a frightened girl, she thought, disconcerted by her own reaction. Why do I still let him have this power over me? Mary Claire, wait! The familiar voice made her stop in the hallway. It was Dr. Paul, now the hospital director, but still the same kind man who had helped her in the most difficult moments. His hair was completely grey, and new wrinkles had formed around his eyes, but his gaze remained gentle and compassionate. I saw you leaving his room. So you already know, the doctor commented, approaching with slow steps. Mary Claire nodded, unable to articulate words at that moment. The knot in her throat had grown, threatening to transform into tears she refused to shed. Dr. Paul gently guided her to a small empty meeting room, closing the door to give them privacy. His situation is serious, more serious than most patients we receive, he explained, sitting across from her. The kidney failure is in its terminal stage. Without a transplant, the chances are practically zero. Mary Claire looked at her own hands, trying to maintain composure. Why are you telling me this, Dr. Paul? He's just another patient among so many others, she replied, but her voice betrayed the emotion she was trying to hide. The doctor observed her carefully before responding. Because I know he's your father, Mary Claire. I've always known. When he was admitted and I saw the name on the chart, I recognized it immediately. I never mentioned it because I respected your choice to keep your distance, but now the situation is different. He paused significantly before continuing. His relatives have been tested, some distant cousins, but no one is compatible. The best chance would be a child or grandchild. You understand what I'm saying? A kidney transplant? From me or Michael? The question came out before she could contain it, revealing that despite all resistance, she was already considering the possibility. Dr. Paul nodded slowly. It's a personal and extremely delicate decision, Mary Claire. I wouldn't be bringing this up if the situation weren't so critical. I know what happened between you. I know how much you suffered because of him. No one would judge you if you chose not to help. The doctor's frankness was one of the qualities Mary Claire most admired in him. He never spoke in circles, never emotionally manipulated. He presented the facts and respected others' decisions. I need to think, she finally replied, standing up. It's too complex to decide now. The doctor also stood, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. Of course, take all the time you need, but... He hesitated for a moment, carefully choosing his words. I know this will seem like an intrusion, but I've been observing your father over the last few weeks. He's not the same man who hurt you. The illness and loneliness have transformed him. Several times I've heard him murmur your name in his sleep. Mary Claire felt a shiver run down her spine. The idea that her father thought of her, even unconsciously, provoked conflicting feelings in her chest. Thank you for letting me know, Doctor. I promise I'll think about it, she said, heading toward the door. Before leaving, she turned one last time. Please don't mention to him that I was here today. Not yet. I need to resolve this with myself first. That night, Mary Claire secretly performed a compatibility test. She used her position at the hospital to expedite the results, without anyone, not even Dr. Paul, knowing about her initiative. 2 days later, she received the sealed envelope with the results. Sitting alone in her office, she opened it with trembling hands. The answer was clear. She was not compatible to donate a kidney to her father. Part of her felt relief. She was free from the responsibility of making such a difficult decision. Another part, however, felt an inexplicable disappointment. As she reflected on her contradictory feelings, a disturbing idea began to form in her mind. If she wasn't compatible, perhaps Michael would be. The boy's blood was a mixture of hers and Justin's, which meant different genetic possibilities. Mary Claire immediately pushed the thought away. How could she even consider involving her son in this? Michael was just a child, innocent of the hurts and resentments of adults. He had never known his grandfather, never known of the rejection, never experienced the abandonment she had suffered. Would it be fair to drag him into this emotional turmoil? On the other hand, a life was at stake, not just any life, the life of the man who, despite everything, was her father, was Michael's grandfather. If the boy were compatible and could save his grandfather, wouldn't he have the right to know this possibility? Wouldn't he have the right to be part of this decision, even if his understanding was limited by his age? "How can I decide something so serious alone?" Mary Claire murmured, putting the envelope in the drawer. "How can I choose between protecting my son from possible suffering or giving him the chance to know his grandfather, to perhaps build a relationship I never had?" The question hung in the air without an answer, while the weight of the decision oppressed her heart. When she arrived home that night, Mary Claire found Michael sitting on the living room floor, surrounded by old boxes she kept stored at the back of the closet. Her heart almost stopped when she saw what the boy was holding in his hands: a yellowed photograph showing the old farm and, in the foreground, August in his prosperous days, next to a horse. "Michael, what are you doing? Who gave you permission to go through these boxes?" she asked more harshly than she intended, startling the boy. Michael looked at his mother with wide eyes, surprised by her unusual reaction. "Sorry, Mum, I was looking for old photos for a school project about our family, and I found these boxes in your closet," he explained, confused by the irritation of his usually calm and understanding mother. "Who is this man in the photo? Why have I never seen these photos before?" Mary Claire took a deep breath, trying to calm herself. It wasn't fair to take out on her son the emotional turmoil consuming her. She sat down beside him on the floor, taking the photo in her hands. Looking at her father's face in his days of glory, so different from the worn-down man she had seen in the hospital, triggered a wave of nostalgia she hadn't expected to feel. "It's a complicated story, son," she finally answered, running her fingers over the worn surface of the photograph. Michael observed his mother with curiosity, sensing he had touched on something important. "He looks strong and important," commented the boy, pointing to August's imposing figure in the photo. "And that farm is huge. It looks like a magical place." Mary Claire couldn't hold back a sad smile. To a child's eyes, the farm must indeed have seemed like an enchanted kingdom. The green fields, the animals, the big house with its spacious porch. "It was a special place, yes," she admitted, allowing herself to recall the happy moments of her childhood before everything fell apart. Michael continued examining the photograph carefully, as if trying to decipher a mystery. "He looks a bit like me, don't you think?" observed the boy, surprising Mary Claire with his perception. Indeed, there were traces of the grandfather in the grandson, the same chin shape, the same eyebrow line, subtle details she herself had never noticed before. "A little, yes," she agreed, feeling a knot forming again in her throat. Michael looked up at his mother, a question clear in his eyes even before it was formulated. "Mom, why have we never visited Grandpa?" The question, so simple and direct, hit Mary Claire like lightning. It was exactly what she feared, what she had tried to avoid during all those years. Having to explain to her son the abandonment, the rejection, the wounded pride that had separated the family. How could she tell the truth without transmitting to Michael her own resentment? How could she be fair to both the boy and August? "It's complicated, son," she began, carefully choosing her words. "Your grandfather and I, we had a falling out a long time ago, even before you were born. We decided to go our separate ways." Michael frowned, dissatisfied with the vague explanation. "But he's still my grandfather, isn't he? All my friends visit their grandparents, get presents, hear stories. Why have I never been able to meet mine?" The innocent question hid a depth that cut Mary Claire's heart. During all those years, she had kept Michael away from his grandfather, out of fear, pride, protection, but also revenge. Had she unconsciously wanted to punish August by depriving him of knowing his grandson? Does he know I exist?" asked Michael, his voice small and hesitant, fearing the answer. Mary Claire felt the weight of the decision on her shoulders. Her son deserved to know some of the truth, adapted to his age. "No, Michael, he doesn't know about you," she answered, holding her son's little hand. "When I discovered the pregnancy, your grandfather and I fought a lot. He said harsh things and I left. We never spoke again." Michael listened attentively, his eyes fixed on his mother's. "So he never directly rejected me? He never said he didn't want to meet me?" he asked, surprising Mary Claire with his insight. "No, he never said that. He doesn't even know you exist," she admitted, realizing how different the situation seemed through her son's eyes. "And is he alive? Could we visit him?" The question caught her off guard. I could lie, but something inside her, the same honesty she had always taught her son, prevented her. "Yes, he's alive. Actually, he's very sick, hospitalized at the hospital where I work." Michael's eyes widened. "Can we visit him, please, Mum? I want to meet my grandfather." Mary Claire looked at her son, so small, so pure, free from the resentments that weighed on adults. Perhaps it was this innocence that everyone needed now. That night, after Michael fell asleep, Mary Claire remained awake, tormented by the moral dilemma. August's photo and the negative results of her compatibility test seemed to weigh on her. Should she submit Michael to tests too? Allowing a child to donate an organ to someone who rejected them seemed to betray her duty as a mother. However, denying this possibility could deprive grandfather and grandson of a chance to connect before it was too late. What's more important, protecting my child from the past or allowing him to build a future with his grandfather? She murmured, looking at the photograph with tired eyes. Mary Claire touched her father's face in the yellowed image. "After everything you did to me, how can you still have so much power over my life? How can you, even on the brink of death, force me into such impossible choices?" A solitary tear ran down her face as the night progressed, and the weight of the decision grew with each minute. The morning sun gently illuminated the hospital room where August rested, connected to various machines that monitored his increasingly fragile state. Mary Claire held Michael's hand as they walked down the corridor toward that long-postponed meeting. After sleepless nights reflecting on the past and future, she had finally decided to tell her son the whole truth about his grandfather, about the rejection, about the rainy night that forever changed the course of their lives. To her surprise, Michael had listened to everything with impressive serenity for a child his age. When she finished her account, fearing her son's reaction, the boy simply hugged her tightly and said, "If Grandpa is sick and needs help, we have to help, right, Mum? You always taught me that we should help people, even when they make mistakes." The innocence and natural kindness of that child, free from the resentments and hurts that contaminated the adult world, deeply moved Mary Claire. "Are you sure you want to meet him, Michael? He may not be the grandfather you imagine," she warned, stroking her son's hair. The boy nodded with determination. "I am, Mum. Everyone deserves a second chance. You always told me that." "Dad, there's someone here who wants to meet you," announced Mary Claire, her voice trembling with contained emotion as she entered the hospital room. August, who was napping lightly, opened his eyes with difficulty. When his gaze met Mary Claire's, an expression of disbelief took over his aged face. "Mary, Claire," he whispered, his voice so weak it could barely be heard. "Is it really you, or am I dreaming again?" Tears began to stream down the wrinkled face of the man, once so strong and now reduced to a fragile shadow of himself. Mary Claire felt her heart tighten at that sight. Where was the proud farmer who had expelled her from home? August tried to raise himself, but his debilitated body barely responded to the command. "Don't strain yourself, Dad," she said, approaching the bed. It was then that Michael entered the room, curiously observing the grandfather he had never known. August's eyes widened upon seeing the boy, immediately perceiving the resemblance to Mary Claire and, more surprisingly, to himself. Is this my—" He couldn't complete the sentence, overcome with emotion. "Yes, this is Michael, your grandson," confirmed Mary Claire. "Michael, this is your grandfather, August." "Hello, Grandpa," said Michael, timidly approaching the bed. "Mom told me you're sick. I hope you get better soon." The simplicity and sincerity of those words caused more tears to stream down August's face. With trembling hands, he touched the boy's face, as if fearing it was an illusion that could disappear at any moment. "My grandson," he murmured, his voice choked. "My grandson whom I never knew existed. How beautiful you are, boy." "You have your grandmother's eyes." For a long moment the room was silent, filled only by the constant beeping of the machines and August's restrained crying. Mary Claire observed the scene with a lump in her throat, divided between the resentment of the past and the compassion that arose before that man broken by time and disease. Finally, August turned his eyes to her. "I was proud and cruel, Mary Claire. All these years I tried to find you to ask for forgiveness, but I didn't have the courage. When I finally discovered where I was, it was already too late. My body was abandoning me, just as I abandoned you that night." The following days were filled with intense emotional commotion for everyone. Between hospital visits, Michael underwent the necessary tests to verify his compatibility as a donor. Mary Claire remained divided, even having allowed the tests. Part of her still feared for her son, for the surgery, for complications that might arise. But Michael showed surprising determination for an 8-year-old child. "Don't be afraid, Mum," he would say with wisdom beyond his years. "If my kidney can save Grandpa, then that's what should happen." The test results confirmed what Mary Claire secretly already expected. Michael was compatible. When the news was given, August cried like a child, unable to comprehend how, after causing so much suffering, he deserved such a gift. Between tears and broken whispers, he told Mary Claire that, after losing almost everything in the financial crisis, he had managed to save a small piece of the family farm. "It's not much, just the house and a few hectares around it," he explained. "But it's our home, the place where you were born, where your mother lived and died. I managed to keep it, thinking that one day perhaps I could find you and return what is rightfully yours." On the eve of surgery, when everything finally seemed arranged, an unexpected visitor appeared at the hospital, causing commotion. Justin, Michael's biological father, who had abandoned Mary Claire upon learning of her pregnancy, emerged as if out of nowhere after 8 years of complete absence. Mary Claire was in the hallway talking with Dr. Paul about the final details of the procedure when she spotted that familiar figure approaching. Her heart raced, not from longing or love, but from apprehension and anger. Justin had changed. He was older, more built, wearing clothes that indicated certain prosperity. But the arrogant, calculating smile remained the same. "Mary Claire, long time," he said, as if they were old friends who hadn't seen each other for a few days. "I heard our son is here. I want to see him. The audacity of this man who had abandoned her and her unborn child in a time of total despair made Mary Claire tremble with indignation. "Our son? You lost the right to call him that when you ran away after learning about the pregnancy. Michael is my son, only mine." Justin smiled, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I've changed. I want to meet my son," he insisted. "I have rights as a father, you know." The confrontation in the hospital corridor attracted the attention of nurses and some patients. Dr. Paul tried to calm the tensions, suggesting they continue the conversation in a more private location. In the empty waiting room, Justin revealed his true intentions. He had heard from acquaintances in the region that old August had recovered part of his fortune and that his grandson would be the main beneficiary. "I think it's fair that, as a father, I can participate in this important moment in my son's life, and also manage any inheritance he may receive since he's a minor," he declared, without even trying to disguise his purely financial interest. Mary Claire looked at him with contempt. "After 8 years, you show up here just because of money? Michael doesn't even know who you are, Justin, and if it depends on me, he will never know what kind of man his biological father is." The tension was interrupted by Michael's unexpected arrival, coming down the corridor looking for his mother. Mary Claire felt the blood freeze in her veins when she saw her son approaching. How would she explain that situation? What would she say about that stranger who was his father? The surgery took place as planned, despite Justin's attempt to stop it with last-minute legal arguments. The on-duty judge, moved by the story and the medical urgency, denied the suspension request and authorized the procedure. Michael entered the operating room as brave as a little warrior, smiling at his anxious mother, who accompanied him as far as allowed. "Everything will be fine, Mom, don't worry," were his last words before anesthesia. The hours that followed were the longest in Mary Claire's life. Every minute seemed to drag on eternally as she waited for news in the waiting room, avoiding Justin, who remained at the hospital, now accompanied by a lawyer. Finally, Dr. Paul appeared, his face tired but smiling. "The surgery was a success. Both Michael and your father are doing well, as expected. Your son is an amazing child, Mary Claire, so young and so brave. The tears she had held back all that time finally flowed freely. Her son was well. Her father had a chance to survive. Despite all the complications, a new beginning seemed possible. During recovery, which proceeded without serious complications, August made a decision that surprised everyone. He called a lawyer to the hospital and, in the presence of witnesses, legally transferred the farm's administration to Mary Claire and registered Michael as the main heir to all his assets. "It's the least I can do after all the suffering I've caused," he explained to his daughter. "I can't change the past, but I can try to fix the future." Justin, upon learning of the decision, intensified his attempts to get closer to Michael, visiting him frequently in the hospital, bringing gifts and trying to create a bond. However, the boy, as perceptive as his mother, soon realized the true intentions behind that sudden display of paternal affection. "He only shows up when Grandpa is around and always talks about the farm and what he'll do when he's an adult," Michael commented to his mother. "I don't like him, Mum. He doesn't look into my eyes when he talks to me like you and Grandpa do." After hearing Michael's perceptive observation about Justin, Mary Claire felt a renewed strength arise within her. She would not allow that man to disturb the peace she had fought so hard to build. When she met Justin in the hospital corridor, "I heard what my son said about you, and he's right," she declared, staring at him firmly. "Michael realized in a week what you really are, something that took me months to see when we were young. I want you to disappear from our lives. We have nothing for you but the contempt you deserve." Justin tried to argue, mentioning his legal rights, but Mary Claire interrupted him. "I've already consulted a lawyer. You abandoned your son before he was even born, never paid child support, never looked for him in 8 years. Any judge will see your intentions for what they really are. If you insist, we'll go to court, and I guarantee you'll leave not only without money but also publicly humiliated. This is your only chance to leave with dignity." Faced with Mary Claire's unwavering determination, Justin finally backed down, realizing that his battle was lost. He never again sought out Michael or Mary Claire. 6 months after the surgery, the family was finally reunited at the old farm, now partially recovered thanks to Mary Claire's tireless work. August, although still fragile, had exceeded medical expectations and enjoyed the companionship of his daughter and grandson, trying to make up for lost years with stories about the family's past and teaching Michael the secrets of rural life. On a quiet Sunday morning, Mary Claire went to wake her father for breakfast, but found him serene in his bed, as if in deep sleep. August had passed away during the night, peacefully, reconciled with his daughter and having known and loved his grandson. Next to his body, a sealed letter addressed to Mary Claire and Michael. With tears in her eyes, she read her father's farewell words and regret, his request for forgiveness for the mistakes made, and his gratitude for the second chance he received at the end of his life. "I spent so much time clinging to pride that I almost lost what really mattered," he wrote. "Thanks to the kindness of you both, I can depart in peace, knowing that my daughter and grandson will be fine and that our land will remain in the family's hands." The sunset painted the sky in orange hues as Mary Claire and Michael sat on the porch of the farmhouse, now renovated and full of life again. The property began to prosper under Mary Claire's dedicated care, who had transformed part of the land into a rural clinic to provide free care to pregnant women in vulnerable situations. It was her way of transforming her own pain into purpose, of preventing other young women from going through the same suffering she had faced. Michael, now almost 9 years old, rested his head on his mother's shoulder as they observed the horizon together. "I miss Grandpa," he commented softly. Mary Claire embraced her son tenderly, silently thanking for that extraordinary child who had taught her so much about forgiveness and compassion. "Your grandfather taught me that it's never too late for forgiveness," she said, caressing the boy's hair, "and you taught me the power of innocence and true love." Michael smiled, feeling proud and loved. He knew, even at his young age, that he had done something important by saving his grandfather, by allowing that reconciliation before it was too late. "I think all 3 of us learned something, didn't we, Mom?" He philosophized with childlike wisdom. "Grandpa learned to ask for forgiveness, you learned to forgive, and I learned that family is more important than anything." The last ray of sunlight disappeared on the horizon, ending a cycle and announcing new beginnings. Mary Claire and Michael remained there, embraced, united by the love and the legacy of healing they had built together. If the story of Mary Claire August, Michael moved you, don't forget to subscribe, like and comment where you're from. And don't go anywhere, the next story is already appearing on screen, made especially for you. See you soon.